The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another great webinar from CPA Academy. My name is Beryl, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar, Diversity and Inclusion One-on-One, Celebrating Pride. I've got our presenters, Jina Etienne and Brian Streig here. I'm going to turn things over to them in just a minute. But before we get started, I want to go through some housekeeping items and do some quick technical checks to make sure everything is working on your end. First of all, if you don't mind going to the GoToWebinars questions tab on your control panel, letting me know you can hear my voice, see the title slide, and you should be able to see myself and our presenters as well. Feel free to let me know what city you're listening in from. I always love seeing where in the world you all are tuning in from today. And if anyone has any technical trouble during the webinar, please do let me know in that questions panel. Keep in mind, there are quite a few of you here, and I'll do my best to get around to each of you as quickly as I can. This is also where you're welcome to put in any questions or comments you have today for our presenters. All right, I am pulling that questions panel over here to see where you all are tuning in from. I see Austin, Texas is in the room. We've got California here, Columbia, Maryland. We've got Georgia, Oklahoma, North Carolina, Cincinnati, Tennessee. Those are coming in fast, which is fabulous. Now that I know everything is working, let's go through some housekeeping. This webinar qualifies for 1 CPE credit. The way you earn that credit today is fairly straightforward. Just stay logged in for 50 minutes of our 1-hour session and answer the poll questions. We'll have a total number of 4 polls during the webinar, and to earn full credit, you'll need to answer at least 3 of them. If you are on a mobile device today, you might need to click your answer a few times and scroll down to find the submit button. And if you do have to log out and log back in for any reason at all, our system will keep track of your time. I wanted to let you know we are recording today's webinar, and the archive along with your CPE credit will be available in your CPA Academy account within 24 hours. We also do recommend that you download today's presentation materials, which you'll find in the control panel's handouts tab. All right, that is all from me. Now that we are all set, let's welcome our presenters. Jina, I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Thank you. I'm coming through okay on the audio. And yes. I want to say, Brian, our peeps are here. There was somebody I saw from Austin, Texas. And Beryl, you said somebody was here from Columbia, Maryland. That is my hometown. And of course, people from all over. So hello everyone. Thank you for joining us. And I apologize in advance. There's some construction in my house. If you hear the noise, just let me know, Brian, and I will go on mute. Speaking of Brian, some of you may recognize Brian. He joined me last year to share his story of what it's like to be a gay man in public accounting. Oops, sorry. I went to the wrong slide. Here we go. Brian is a CPA. I just mentioned he's in Austin, Texas. And if you missed that episode with Brian before, you can catch it on my YouTube channel. It's available anytime. And he's back today to join me on a conversation about Heritage Months and Awareness Days, and in particular, what Pride Month means to him and why celebrating Heritage Months are an important way for organizations to demonstrate their commitment to D&I. Brian, you and I met several years ago in the tax Twitter sphere, and we had a near miss. We've never met in person, but I was in Austin. We tried to get together, but it didn't work out, so hopefully that'll change soon. But thank you for coming back. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. All right, so we're going to jump in. Now, for those who might be new to the series, this is really designed differently than traditional webinars. The goal here is, instead of doing a traditional presentation where you cover a mix of topics, each webinar is really a focus of conversation with me and maybe 1 or 2 other people, different people from across the profession. We explore one issue, and they're structured as conversations. Now that I say that, I'm about to lie, because in this session, we're going to do something a little bit differently. I'm going to spend a few minutes walking through the history of Heritage Months, and I want to distinguish between Heritage Months and Awareness Days. And then, Brian, I'll bring you into the conversation at a couple points along the way before we jump into a dialogue. So with that, I'm going to just go ahead and start, which is what are Heritage Months? And Brian, of course, you are welcome to jump in anytime, interrupt me, and share some additional thoughts if they should pop up. So we'll start with what are Heritage Months and how did they start? And so really what they're intended to be is a way to recognize the achievements and the history of different minority groups where in this country there's been a long history of those groups being overlooked, whether they've not been reflected in education, in the media, or across broader society. And so heritage months are a way to start to change this. The different months offer opportunities for different members of groups to raise awareness of the achievements and cultural history of those groups. Now, many of these months are recognized by states or by an act of Congress, or both. Others are widely celebrated, even though they're not formally recognized by a governmental proclamation. Now, as for which days are designated for the different cultures, for which month has been designated, the month doesn't always connect to a date in history, but it usually does. So, for example, if you look at Black History Month, which is in February, it started in 1926 as Negro History Week by Dr. Carter Woodson. And then it evolved to African American History Month at Kent State University in 1970 and became formally recognized by President Ford in 1976, all because of events that took place in and around February. And the same is true for Women's History Month. On March 8th, 1857, female textile workers marched in protest for shorter work days and better wages. 51 years later, in March 8th, same day, but in 1908, there was another protest for women by women, this time child labor, sweatshop conditions, and so on. 2 years later, starting in 1910, there started to be this annual recognition of that date as informally International Women's Day, and then established by an act of Congress, the month of March was created as Women's History Month in 1987. So this here on the screen, this isn't a full list of all the heritage months, but it includes maybe the bigger ones, or maybe the I should say major heritage months. And I'm not planning to walk through them all because that is not the point of today's webinar. But it's really today to raise awareness. And I want to walk quickly through a few to give you a few different types of examples about how they're created or established. But before I do that, I do want to jump barrel to our first poll because I'm curious to see who recognizes them.
Great, let me go ahead and launch that poll right now. Question is, does your organization recognize heritage months? Yes, no, or not sure, prefer not to answer. And we leave each polling question open for about 60 seconds for you to get your answers voted in.
You know, it's funny, Brian, when we were talking about this question, we didn't define recognize. So it's interesting to see how people answer. I don't know if it's a formal, doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a day off. It could be that they have internal event.
Yeah, that's a good point. There are lots of different levels of recognition.
Yeah. As opposed to our organizations, they're crickets, like mum's the word. And so I guess it's not that.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, if that's the case, then it's not. But I would hope most firms have at least something, whether it's because somebody in their workforce it belongs to that community or something that ties them in to that.
Right. Well, I see the poll results are almost in.
They are. Let me go ahead and close this down in 3, 2, and 1. And I'll share those results on screen really quick. It looks like 53% saying yes, 29% saying no, 18% not sure.
There you go. So it looks like the majority do, which is great. Now, like we said, we didn't define what recognize means. Now, as I mentioned,
yeah, it could be any of the months, just one of the fun ones.
One of the fun months. We're going to show a couple fun days here in a minute, but I'm looking on my screen over here. So many of them to highlight. So, for example, Asian American Month. It's Asian American, Native, Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. May was selected because it recognizes a couple of things. That was the date that the first Japanese immigrants arrived here in the United States. And it was also in May 10 actually, of 1869, where the Transcontinental Railroad was completed and the majority of the work was done by Chinese Americans. So there's a connection there to May. June, is it J? No, it's also in May. Jewish American Heritage Month that recognizes the date the first Jewish Americans arrived in New Amsterdam in 1684, and it was declared a date by President Bush only in 2006, which is interesting. June is Pride Month. We'll talk about that in a minute. Caribbean Heritage Month is also in June. Yep. And that one was started by a resolution in the House of Representatives. But in 2005, it took a year to be recognized by George Bush. Hispanic Heritage Month was initially a week, and it started back in 1968 and extended it to a month in 1988. And the reason it starts September 15 and it runs to October 15 is that September 15 marks the anniversary of independence for Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. And then between those two dates, Mexico and Chile also celebrate their Independence Day. Two more, I promise this isn't going to go on forever. American Indian and Alaskan Native Heritage Month. So this is an example of one that isn't formally acknowledged by a proclamation. Instead, November in 1990 was designated National American Indian Heritage Month. And then every year since 1994, there's been a proclamation recognizing the month. So it's referred to as a Heritage Month, although it's not actually a Heritage Month. So there's a lot of history here. October, I know, Brian, Italian American Heritage and Culture Month is close to your heart.
Yeah, that one's one that I try to do something, each year for that. It's kind of a weird one that, it started because of the mass migration of Italians that started, 4 million came within a few years in the early 1900s. And so Christopher Columbus, being historically Italian, someone they kind of identified with and used to show their Americanness. And then now, 100 years later, he's not that popular of a guy. And so there is discussion in the different chat groups and leadership offices about whether that's still somebody to highlight during our Heritage Month.
Right. Isn't it interesting? Because there's an ebb and a flow to what culture and what greater society says is acceptable, as we can even see from what's happening right now, post George Floyd and all of the social justice. And I think it's actually raised and heightened awareness around these days and why these days are important to recognize. Now, all right, so I'm talking about Heritage Months. Let me move us forward to, where's my mouse? To the next slide. So this is really about awareness days. And these are different. And months, there are more days than months. They're increasingly common. I actually found a statistic. Let me find it. This one I found in the Atlantic. Researchers found that more than 145 bills, including the words Awareness Day, so a bill with the words Awareness Day, were introduced into Congress since 2005, which is crazy. That means there's constantly more and more and more days that are being established. So they're really common. Some are national days. They vary by country. Some are international days like the United Nations or the WHO, World Health Organization, international charities. And their causes from health and welfare to animal welfare to arts and sports and social cause. Some are just for fun. Now, I think what's important here, and at the very top bullet, you see cultural celebrations in the context of D&I. What's really important here is it's about understanding different cultures, because when you work with people from different cultures, it's really important to understand the different rules, the norms, the expectations. Otherwise, you can make mistakes. And some of those mistakes can be harmless. But some of them can result in things like a microaggression or a really significant miscommunication, just because there are different forms of communication. For example, Japanese communication style, it's non-confrontational. There's a lot of thought put into the choice of words used. I think I read somewhere that if you ask somebody for their opinion and their opinion is no, rather than say no, they might say something like, I'm not sure. So you kind of understand the language, but if you're not familiar with that and you're talking to someone who's Japanese or one of your colleagues is Japanese and they've grown up in this tradition, they're not saying no doesn't mean no and can result in some conflicts. And so that type of cultural awareness is important. And so recognizing and celebrating days like this is really powerful. And I actually was curious how much money is raised. World Autism Day, for example, they raised $10 million around the world through the Autism Speaks website. So this stuff is real, and it's significant what it can result in terms of awareness. Now, here's just a couple of examples of other awareness days. You can see some of these are a little silly. Bottom right corner, Jellyfish Day. You see Brain Injury Awareness Month, not so silly. Some we're really familiar with, Giving Tuesday. According to US News, $2.7 billion was raised last year alone. And that's a 9% increase from the year before, from 2020. Earth Day in the upper right-hand corner, that started in the 1970s. It's April 22nd, and it's around environmental awareness. Did you know that 10% of the US population participate in rallies and demonstrations, marches, and other events? And then here, Juneteenth, that's one that's becoming increasingly aware. It's short for June 19th, and it's a federal holiday, and it commemorates the date when all enslaved African Americans learned of their emancipation. And I say learned because the Emancipation Proclamation was actually issued by Abraham Lincoln in January of 1863, 2.5 years earlier than Juneteenth. And it happened in Galveston, Texas, when federal troops arrived there to take control of the state and ensure slaves were freed. And so Texas, Brian, I think that's in your neighborhood. What do they do in Texas? Is it recognized differently?
I don't know if it's differently, but it's always been in the news. You know, we've always heard about it. You know, since it's during the summer, like growing up, you don't really talk about it that much during school because it doesn't ever happen on a school day. But you do learn about it in Texas history, and you hear about it in the news. And if you know people, then you know there's usually barbecues and like also, you know, just summer fun kind of activities. But there's definitely over the years been a lot more formalized activity rather than families gathering type stuff.
Yeah. And I'm really glad to hear that because, you know, you were just talking about barbecues and fun activities, and it makes sense if you're celebrating the freedom of a people, in this case, enslaved Americans, and other days are more somber. So, you know, and I don't know that people recognize like the difference between Memorial Day and Veterans Day. They both celebrate military, but Memorial Day is about remembering those we lost. And Veterans Day is about celebrating those who serve. And so maybe one is a more somber event than the other, but it depends on where you celebrate. Okay, now just for some fun, and then we'll get into some of the conversation. I found a couple websites that you all might be interested in. If you want to know what days are coming up, not just months, but awareness days, there's a website called National Today. It's right here on the bottom, nationaltoday.com. And so as you can see, for example, today is National Iced Tea Day. So there's an example of a silly day. All right, I have a couple more examples. Here's another website. It's called There Is a Day for That. And that's actually the name of the website. There's a day for that. And so you have today is a couple of days. It's National Ballpoint Pen Day. I just realized I never turned on closed captioning. Let me do that. I'm sorry for those who could have used this. I should have had this on this entire time. All right, so today is National Ballpoint Pen Day. Okay, we just saw on the other slide, it's National Iced Tea Day. National Black Cow Day. I didn't even know that was a thing. National Herbs and Spices Day. All right, another thing I didn't know. And just for fun, two more. Tomorrow is National Rosé Day. And the day after that is it's also National Corn on the Cob Day. So when I say different organizations have different dates, some are fun, some are silly, some support causes and help raise awareness like National Autism Day and Giving Tuesday, it really runs the gamut. And they're constantly being created new ones, and they're on the rise. So let's jump into our second poll before we start chatting, Brian. How many Heritage or Awareness Months do you recognize or celebrate? This is a general question. This isn't necessarily your company, but for you.
I have launched that poll on everyone's screen now. I also wanted to let you know, Jina, Paul is saying it is also French Friday.
Well, thank you, Paul. That is very important. Is that today or tomorrow? If it's today.
He did not indicate, so.
Drop that in there, Paul. That way I know whether I'm going to go have fries later today. Of course, every day should be French Fry Day if we're being serious.
Thank you to those of you that have voted in on the poll. We'll leave it open for about 30 more seconds.
Somebody pointed out that that picture is not even a ballpoint pen. Thank you, Jeff. I love it. You guys are putting stuff, you guys. Everyone share your feedback, share your comments in the Q&A. I'm also going to be pulling some of those questions out to throw them to Brian. Paul said today is French Fry Day.
You know, I thought it was interesting. Anthony Ross pointed out that Juneteenth wasn't actually the date that all slaves were notified. The ones that were in Union states weren't freed until a few months later.
Yeah, we can talk about that in a minute. Where are we on the poll? Well, we're overtime on the poll.
We are good. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and close it down in 3, 2, and 1. Quickly share those results. 26% saying several, 24% saying some, 35% saying a few.
10% say none, and the others prefer not to answer. So that's cool. There's a wide mix there. Okay, so Brian, what you were saying about the Juneteenth, it's actually true. Once the Emancipation Proclamation was passed, slaves in the North were freed, but slaves in the South didn't know. And so progressively they were made aware as those states became part of the Union, if you will. But then it was a matter of that word spreading west. So Juneteenth ends up being the date that the last slaves in Texas found out that they were free. That's why June 19th is the day celebrated differently than January 1. So it's really interesting. Thank you, Anthony, for sharing that, because it was not all at once. So Brian, you wanted to join me. I asked you if you would be interested in talking about Pride Month and other months and what that means to you. I have the history of Pride Month. I don't know if you want to walk through it or if you want me to jump through it and we can talk about it after. How do you feel about that?
Oh, no, let's kind of walk through the history. I think that helps. I mean, that's part of what Pride Month is supposed to be for, is educational as well as celebratory.
Yeah, exactly. So for everyone, if you didn't know, it was established on June 11, 1999 by President Clinton, but it actually started back at Stonewall Inn in June of 1969. Stonewall Inn was in New York City. It was a bar and tavern that was frequented by many in the LGBTQ community. Police raided that bar to enforce an alcohol control law, but that was deemed as a real a cover for just trying to raid it, because that was a law that wasn't enforced anywhere else. Customers were beaten, forcibly removed, and arrested with little or no cause. And once word got out in the community, crowds started to gather to protest the mistreatment of the gay community. And this event has become known as the Stonewall Rebellion. You see it here on the slide. It was in June 28th. And it's considered the catalyst for the political movement today for gay and lesbian civil rights. And now it's commemorated every day, every year on June 28th. It was originally commemorated as marches, but now we know it to be the Gay Pride Parade that you see in most communities and cities. So that's your history lesson, everyone. It started in 69. It was inspired in 69 and became an actually recognized holiday, federal holiday, Federal Heritage Month in 1999. Interestingly, Governor Jerry Brown in California established June as Pride Month in California in 2018. So there's some history for you. Anything else you want to share? I mean, Brian, what does this mean for you? I don't mean to say you're a gay guy, but you are. Is it okay to say that? Is there any offense?
Yeah.
Brian, is it gay?
Yeah. I mean, the things leading up to Stonewall, and at that time, it was illegal to be gay. I mean, it was illegal to be wearing any clothing that didn't conform to your birth sex. So any cross-dressing, anything like that was illegal. To show affection, not just intimacy, but just affection, was an illegal act. And that was one of the things the cops were going after in Stonewall, and what the people outside that were protesting, one of their ways to protest was showing affection. They were kissing and hugging, and that was breaking the law in front of the cops. So, I mean, it was, I mean, we've come a long way. And that's part of the celebration. It's just that we can show affection out in public and it's not illegal.
You know, what's interesting is if anybody has an opportunity to go back and see this conversation with Brian last year, I want to say it was April 2nd, because it was before the end of tax season. I was amazed you were willing to join me. And one of the things Brian was really passionate about, and what you shared with us, was a map of the world. And maybe I should have put a copy of it here. And it was illegal then. It's legal in the United States today, but that is still not true around the world.
So, yeah, there are a lot of places I wouldn't be comfortable going. I mean, I could pull it off, but I definitely wouldn't be on my first list of places to go just because of that.
And by pull it off, you mean you just have to pretend you're not gay.
Right.
And which we know there are a lot of people here in the States that still feel the need to hide. And in fact, revealing that you're gay is termed coming out of the closet, or coming out. And that tells you everything you need to know how it still shows up in our culture today.
Right. I mean, most LGBTQ people at some point, even after they come out, you go back, I mean, you shut that door every once in a while for just personal safety reasons and, you know, mental safety reasons. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why you have to put that barrier back up.
No, absolutely. And the thing is, it's something we're working on. You talked about gender identity, gender match. I think also in that session we did last year, I believe we did this. If not, I know I did it in one of these webinars. Explain the difference between gender identity, gender expression, gender assignment. What is the word? There's 4 of them: identity, expression. Okay, now it's losing my mind, but it's slipping my mind. But there's a language to gender that people don't even understand and realize, and so it's becoming more comfortable. So for you live in a community that you don't live in a place where everyone is gay. You live openly and freely as a gay man. You're married, right? Your husband is Kurt. You have a cute dog. I don't remember his name. Ryder. And you all cook and have a wonderful blog. In case anybody likes it, you can follow Brian on Accountants Who Cook # on Twitter. You keep posting pictures there, which means, Brian, shockingly, you're just another normal guy.
I'm just a normal, boring accountant, really.
Accountants are not boring. Let me correct you there. We have a bad reputation, but people don't know we're actually kind of fun and interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we've got our own kind of uniqueness.
So do you do anything special, either in your community, in your home, or in your firm, to recognize and then celebrate Pride Month?
You know, yes and no. Austin is weird because we've moved. The people that make those decisions moved our Pride celebration to September. This happened, I think, around 2010, maybe a little earlier. And it was because attendance was so low because it was summer and all the UT students had left town. So they wanted to make it at a point in the year when students are back in town. I mean, it was a time that was a big transition in Austin. We were small enough that made a big difference. So we moved it to September, which means it's in the middle of busy season. So I've gone to the parade a couple of times since then, but normally I just kind of watch video streaming of it.
Right. Do you do anything in your family or in your community of friends in June, just privately? Is there anything that, I don't mean to pry, so you can tell me, it's TMI, but.
No, I mean, we do. I mean, it also coincides with the beginning of summer. So everybody's kind of got that free time. So, Wednesday night we went and had a Japanese barbecue at a friend's house, and he and his husband hosted us and cooked out, and it was fun.
You know what I'm encouraged by? I was talking with a client, I want to say, and actually, no, it was a prospective client. I want to say this was like 2 or 3 weeks ago. And it was myself and different members of their leadership team just talking about what I do, what do they need, what kind of training do they want. And one woman, just as casually as could be, we were talking, da 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 da, and she referred to her wife and then kept talking. And one of the things I noticed about that moment is it was no different than if I had mentioned my husband. But I can say 5 years ago, if somebody said that, there would have been a moment like people would have hesitated because they didn't know, was it okay to say that? What, are we allowed to talk about that? And so that's different. And I'm imagining in your firm, at least everyone is perfectly comfortable talking about it where you don't have to hide.
Right. And I mean, from the very first being hired back in 2007, it was stressed to me that they would be accepting. And, like the very first Christmas party, I brought Kurt with us, with me to it. And he's been to every one since then. And we're having our big kind of end of season, busy season party next week at a Franklin barbecue. And so, the managing partner called me specifically and said, Kurt's going to come, right? And I was like, yeah, of course.
Yeah, no. And what's nice about that is you don't have to bring Kurt and say, this is my friend. But in fact, you can bring Kurt and say, this is my husband, this is my partner, whatever word you choose to use. So I'm looking at the Q&A, and I just want to acknowledge, Paul made a comment. Paul said, days that you consider not classic days of recognition are classic to those impacted. So don't downplay any day not shown on the list. And I'll just apologize. That was not my intention to downplay any day. I pulled some of, I'll say, the more widely known days to include on that list. Of course, now to your point, Paul, perhaps I should have included some that people don't even know exist. So that was not my intention. Let's see, what else is on here? Company to company, as if company by company, they're noticing that Juneteenth is starting to be recognized in Austin. So there was a comment there specifically to where you live. This was about a poll. Somebody said yummy about your blog. What is it, by the way? What is the name of your blog?
Our Ostentatious Life.
Our Ostentatious Life. And I will tell you all, there are some good recipes there. I've tried a few. And Megan says that they celebrate theirs in Atlanta in October. So it's interesting that the celebrations might take place even if the Heritage Month is at a different time.
Well, in October kind of makes sense because it's also Gay and Lesbian History Month.
Yep, actually, yeah.
So there's some connection to that, and National Coming Out Day, and I think it's GLAAD that sponsors it, the Spirit Day. And so there are a bunch of days there that it would make sense for October. I'm not sure how it became September, like specifically. I think Dallas has always done something in September, and that might be related to it, but it was just, I don't get to make those decisions.
What's interesting about that is it's just an illustration of the difference between a Heritage Month, which is a month that's often, but not always, designated through some either act of Congress or state legislature. So there's a formal recognition of that month. And as a result, it can often be a state holiday or a federal holiday. And as a result, that's when people tend to spend a lot of effort and energy sending out messages of support, sharing history. Many people who are on LinkedIn or Twitter might see that companies might have put a rainbow around their logo in support of Pride Month. And so that's the kind of thing you see in the month. But then to your point, there are awareness days that are related to LGBTQ community throughout the year. They're not necessarily in June. So that's interesting. By the way, let me put the Pride Month but this picture. I found this picture 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You can't really see the orange line in there between the red and the yellow, but there are 8 colors in the flag. I just thought it'd be interesting to share that each color symbolizes something. So I don't know if you know this is just trivia. Do you know this? Which colors are which?
I do know. I've seen it listed out many times. You'd think I would know it, but I don't know it off the top of my head.
All right. So purple at the bottom is magic or art. Turquoise, the violet, is spirit. The one up from that is serenity or harmony. The turquoise color in there is magic or art. Then there's green, that's nature. Yellow, sunlight. Orange, healing. You can't see the orange, it's just a sliver between the yellow and the red. And then red stands for life, and then the hot pink stands for sexuality. And this was created as a banner back in 1978 by Gilbert Baker as a symbol for liberation and hope for queer people around the world. And it has become, it's been, I don't want to say co-opted, but it is now the known, recognized symbol to celebrate not just Pride Month, but pride and history and awareness for the LGBTQ community. So there's a little trivia for you. I want to look at the Q&A and see what else is in here. Somebody said Puerto Rican Day Parade is in June, but Hispanic Heritage Month is in September. That's actually a really good point. And next 2 weeks from now, I'm going to have a guest. His name is Mark Travis Riviera. We're going to be talking about intersectionality. And this point is about that very intersectionality. If you are gay and from Puerto Rico, you might celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month, September to October 15, and that might be when there's a pride parade. So it's interesting how all of these celebrations are different. By the way, somebody says it's big in Key West.
It is very big in Key West.
So let me see if there's something we want to. So most of the things here are comments, not questions. Here's a comment that says, our industry is conservative. And if the client base is conservative, they may need to read the room because, and that is a very fair point around anything related to diversity and inclusion. Not everybody's on the same page and at the same point in the journey. And so you have to be thoughtful about what you say, when you say, and how you say it, because you still have to be respectful of your clients without sacrificing your own values and morals. So.
Well, that's 100% true. I mean, I've had clients, not necessarily at this firm, but in prior firms, that you definitely had to read the room and know that it was just easier to get through it, just keeping your head down and focusing on the work, and that was it.
Right. No, absolutely. And you could say this is true for a lot of groups over the history of, as we work on diversity and inclusion. I think that what's interesting is that when we talk about issues around gender and race, I don't mean sexuality and gender identity. I mean male, female when I talk about gender, the traditional, just the binary categories. There's been a lot of work done in terms of the women's suffrage movement, as we talked about Women's History Month, that dates all the way back to the 1800s, early 1900s. But then you have something like Irish American Heritage Day that was only established by Trump. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. And so we are still, as a society, working on recognizing all the different heritages that make up the United States. You know, we've called ourselves the melting pot since I can remember growing up. And not all of us are aware of all the heritages and cultures. Not all of us know about them. Not all of us recognize them. And in areas that might be more homogenous than others, you just have to be thoughtful about how you go around talking about these issues and acknowledging them without hiding and sacrificing. I think that's the key here, is we want people to not feel the need that they have to hide something.
I think you're right. I know that the melting pot theme was pretty big, and especially, you know, coming out of World War II, that mentality of, you know, merging in. I know my grandmother never spoke Italian to my dad. Like, and her family, no one past her generation would speak Italian and pass that down. And part of that was to assimilate as quickly as possible and not stand out, that melt into society. And it wasn't until I came around and started doing the research to actually reconnected different branches of the family and, found these people and found out where we came from and that type of thing. So the melting pot was good, but it also kind of hid a lot of things that, because those cultural attitudes and behaviors didn't go away. So like you say, you've got to kind of understand, where are they? Like, what religion is this group, and how did they practice, and what could you say that might offend them that you wouldn't know about?
It's on a personal note, I'm really excited to hear that for you. You were able to reconnect with your heritage, because there are many people who are first generation in this country who don't speak their native language for that very reason. And it's not necessarily because the family put pressure on them, but perhaps it's because the parents didn't speak their native language in the home so that their children would learn English. And that varies, but it's certainly something that has happened. So I'm really happy for you that you've been able to go back and do that. Not everyone can trace their history back, but if those who are interested, there's new technology today that allows you to find out more about your background. What was the point I was going to make? There was another thing I was thinking. It's gone. Completely gone. Oh, man, and it was probably a good point, too. All right, so while I'm not remembering something, let me go back to you're welcome to, if there's, you know what, I'm going to do a polling question, Beryl. Maybe that'll buy me some time to remember.
I was just going to ask, Jina, do you want me to launch the next poll question to give you some time? So let me launch that now. The question is, are you aware of the history of Pride Month? And Jina, you kind of filled us in earlier. Maybe do you want to know if prior to today?
Oh yeah, just if people were familiar with it. Maybe I should have made it a past tense question.
You'll see your answer choices listed. We'll leave this poll open for about 60 seconds.
Let me see here. Someone made a comment that many people abandoned their language because of prejudice at the time. Exactly. I think that's some of what Brian was referring to, that they didn't want to reveal their ethnicity or identity.
All right, we've just about got enough voted in. I'm going to close down this poll in 3, 2, and 1. Closing this down. Sharing the results, 63% saying yes, 32% saying no, 5% saying prefer not to answer.
That is so encouraging. 63% said yes. I'll say that I didn't even know the history of the history of Pride Month until maybe 4 or 5 years ago. But I think part of it is because we're starting to see more dialogue and more sharing and more celebration around it. One of the questions that came, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, the history is actually kind of fast. I think it's fascinating. I like history in general, but there's a podcast, Making Gay History, that had a whole series on Stonewall in 2019, the 50th anniversary, where they had archival recordings of people talking. And so you actually got to hear the people that were there, like telling their stories. It was really neat if you like that history.
Well, and what's interesting, by the way, I remembered my point, and Ted helped me because he asked a question about this. But I'll come back to that. What's interesting is that any movement, including something like Stonewall that evolved into Pride Month, those movements don't happen without allyship. So the straight community, the cisgender community, had to come out and celebrate and support the importance of gay rights, and the reason that we need to respect and become aware of and protect people in the LGBTQ community. That wouldn't have happened without the straight community supporting it. We wouldn't have seen progress for discrimination for people of color without Caucasian support. We would not have seen the suffrage movement progress there without male support. And so I think it's really important to recognize that all of these conversations aren't just to either put down a different group. It's really about celebrating the history around a particular group, mostly because that history doesn't live in our, we're not aware of it day to day, even though it might be something we learned about in school. Samuel, I think, asked, what are ways a firm can celebrate pride without seeming performative? And that one's going to be hard. Any suggestions, by the way, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, it could just be a performative kind of makes it harder, but going to the parade as a group. I mean, you don't have to participate, just go and watch it. At least in Austin, it's a huge ordeal. There are lots of families that go. It's very fun. Most of the big companies in town, Dell always has a huge, mass of people that they take down. So it can be a lot of fun and a good outing for the, just to do something outside of work. It could be as easy as having a rainbow cake and just kind of like make sure that everybody that works there knows it's a safe space. They may not feel comfortable coming out, but at least they know it's a safe space.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. And I think the challenge with performative is, and where I think it might seem performative, is that a company puts a rainbow flag around their logo on LinkedIn, but at their office, they never talk about it. There's no information about it. People don't feel safe revealing, coming out, if you will. I would say that falls into the performative category. On the other hand, a company might tell people, hey, it's Pride Parade, and encourage people to go, but not go themselves. I wouldn't call that performative. I would call that progress. That they're headed in that direction, but like anything else, it's baby steps. We don't just all spontaneously change overnight. And so companies, if they're working on demonstrating their commitment to D&I, we want to give them those opportunities to do that in small steps and celebrate those moments. But I hear you about the concerns of it being performative. One of the other things was, under what circumstances should heritage be an issue at work? If not, then leave those issues at home. And I think the challenge with heritage is that there are cultural differences that if we don't understand them, we run the risk of creating problems that we don't recognize. I was reading earlier today, and I don't remember the country, but it was around workplace expectations. And it was a person from America that moved to another country. I want to say it might have been Denmark. I don't remember. And they were uncomfortable because when they got there, they were a manager, they had a leadership role, but they were sitting in the middle of an open space with everyone else. And so they moved their desk into an office without realizing that hierarchy is not the way that people see and respect and work with each other in that country. And so that simple cultural difference, the manager expecting to have a private office, created a whole lot of problems for that manager because it sent exactly the wrong message and went against their cultural norms. And so for heritage, we mean ethnic culture, racial culture, religious culture, LGBTQ identity, and gay culture, if you will, that it's understanding that those differences are there, because otherwise you might say or do something that turns out to be offensive to somebody else, not because they're super sensitive, but because it was a derogatory comment. But had you not understood the context of that, it wouldn't have made any sense. So hopefully that helps with the question or the point that was brought up. I don't know if you have any other comments you want to share or thoughts you want to share. I'm looking at the Q&A for other comments to share with the group.
Yeah, I don't know as much about firm-wide, but on a personal level, when you're interacting with coworkers and clients, to not presume that they're in a heterosexual relationship. Don't presume that you're talking to your male client so he has a wife, because he may not. And so you can rephrase things and say it in a way that gives him the space to reply, yes, my wife and I, or yes, my husband and I. And even if he has a wife, he may have a gay child or a gay brother or a lesbian sister. And it still shows to him that you are going to be respectful of his family.
Mm-hmm. So at the risk of being controversial, and on behalf of somebody who I know is going to put this into the comments or a question, and sometimes I think about this myself. Are we being too sensitive if I have to constantly now neutralize everything I say to every man in case he's gay? And isn't it okay for me to refer to somebody or ask if they have a wife, only to find out that they are gay, in which case I immediately acknowledge that they have a husband and move on in the conversation. Rather than having to put everybody with if they're gay, I want to make sure I'm not saying the wrong word. Because that's a fair concern in terms of training. And
no, that's a fair question. And I think it is valid in terms of, I'm not going to be upset. But if I don't feel this space that it's safe to bring that into the conversation, you might never know that about me.
Right. That's fair. That's fair. And what's interesting, somebody earlier said, read the room. We all project various cues and clues and behaviors and subtleties that can indicate when it's safe for us to show more of ourselves. And there's something called code switching, which is where people change their look, their language, their mannerisms, the things that they talk about in order to adapt themselves to the environment that they are in. And it's basically a way to make everyone comfortable and make them seem less different. I mean, I can't hide my race, but if I may be so, I don't want this to sound challenging, but I know this is the way I've heard it spoken. I can't change my race, but I can talk white or sound more white and not speak what is known as African American vernacular English around people who aren't Black. And so switching back and forth between those two forms of English is a form of code switching, just because I want to fit in. And so you look for cues and clues when you need to do that. Not everybody needs to do that all the time, but some people might feel they need to do it to be safe, to your point. So these are topics I need to put on. We need to have a webinar on some of the challenges of assimilation, because that's what that's talking about. Let's see. We have 3 minutes left before we start the process of wrapping up. I want to see what's in the Q&A. I don't know if you have another thought. I keep saying to you, think of something, Brian, while I go look at the Q&A. But somebody says spouse is always better. That's fair. Spouse is gender neutral. Assuming they're married, of course. Partner.
Well, I mean, that's what, yeah. I mean, even my friends, there are some we don't know how to label it. I mean, they've been together for so long and were together before marriage was legal. And do you go through it after, 20 years together? Is it, what's a piece of paper? But then I try to tell them all the tax and other legal aspects.
Stop being, now you're being, well, you can file a joint return. That's not what they're going for. But it's funny you say that. And somebody made a comment about, can we stop being so sensitive? And I have to agree with that. Although I'll admit being sensitive myself, because I know some people started referring to my husband as my partner. And I felt very proud in being able to say he's my husband, not because of a gender thing, but that was my preferred term. And sure, he's my partner. Sure, he's my spouse, but I like husband. But I didn't take offense. It's just, I don't know, political correctness and cancel culture is putting us all at risk of living in these boxes of safety. And I'm hoping that we're starting to work in a space where we can have the kinds of conversations you and I are having, open conversations. We can stumble and fall. We can say the wrong thing in the wrong way and forgive each other and then go have a drink, which, by the way, I'm going to do when I come to Austin. We're going to do that.
Definitely.
Somebody asked, is code switching good or bad? And we all do it. I just gave the example of race, but all of us do it. Minorities have to do it, feel a particular pressure to do it, especially in the workplace, which is why you see a lot of it written that way. But I mean, a woman who has children might play down the fact that she has children when she's in certain professional settings. And it's not necessarily about trying to hide something so much as to just go back to read the room, right? And just fit in, but not because they're hiding in a negative sense, but it's still that adaptation where you're fluid and you sort of match the space that you're in. To some degree, that's completely normal. It's only a problem if you're doing it because you're hiding something. And then it gets to be a bit tricky. There are a lot of things in the Q&A, most of which are comments. I encourage anyone who wants to reach out. Brian and I are both available. Brian's contact information is on, let's see, did I get the right, let me see. Let me make sure I get the right slide. There you go. And if you download the attachment, the PDF, you can actually click on the email address. You can click on the website and it will jump you out to Brian's website. His phone number is there. You can reach him on LinkedIn. The same with me. On my contact slide, you can reach me. What I would ask, I don't know if you feel this way too, Brian, but when I get invitations on LinkedIn, it's really helpful to know, hey, I'm following up from the webinar. That way we know that they're just not another salesperson trying to reach out. Like we all know that people do that all the time. All right, so before we wrap up, any last words, Brian?
No, I mean, I think this is all, I mean, the questions that have come in have been very, very good and insightful. And I mean, we're all learning. We're going through life, learning all this as we go. So I think it's great to have different perspectives and be just cognitive. You don't have to be like overly sensitive to someone else, but aware that they may be coming from a different place. And that's the starting point.
And my gosh, can we just talk about it instead of being reactive, defensive? Of course, that goes both ways. I have to not be defensive and reactive. If I'm asking you to not be defensive and reactive, it's a process. You know, I know for me, I'm naturally defensive. And yes, I know there's one more polling question, folks. I do know this, but before we go there, I want to let everyone know, as you may have heard, this is a bi-weekly webinar series. So in 2 weeks, I'll be talking with Mark Travis Rivera, who is a professional storyteller. He has a great story. And one of the things we're going to be talking about is intersectionality and how all the different identities within us, me, Black, woman, married, disability, CPA, I don't know if that's a thing, but it's part of my identity, actually, and how all of those things come together to create that sense of whether or not I feel like I belong. So we're going to be talking about that in 2 weeks. I would love for you all to join us. That page is now up and available for registration. And
I just posted the link in the chat for everyone if they want to sign up for it, Jina.
Why, thank you, Beryl. Okay, that was a horrible accent. And so with that, Beryl, so we don't get fired, how about we launch that last polling question before we throw it back to you to wrap us up?
I certainly can. That poll is up and launched. What was the most valuable part of today's webinar? We'll leave this open for about 60 seconds. The future webinar topic that you brought up, Jina, I saw someone in the Q&A say they would love to come to that topic just for future reference.
Somebody asked what are some other websites to go to get more D&I information, and there's a plethora of information out there. But most of the information you find is from consultants offering services. So I'm not sure. Christy, if you want to email me, maybe I can help you find something if you're looking for something specific. Somebody said, why not just say spouse rather than a gender-specific term? That's fair. Or gay. Somebody said gay. I don't know what that's saying too. It definitely feels dismissive if people continue to say partner or spouse if you declare them as a husband or wife. Hey, thank you, Samuel. That's really about when you hear somebody use a term, you use the term that they refer to themselves. That's always a good practice.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and close down this poll in 3, 2, and 1. And it looks like 49% are saying they learned something new today, and we're getting lots of great comments about this session. Any final words to share before I close us out, Jina or Brian?
Something brilliant, Brian, about Pride Month? You're like,
hey, you have a chance to go to a parade, go do it. It's fun. Take your kids. It's always a blast.
There you go. And supporting the gay community and really spending the time to become more aware. Pride Month, as well as all the other heritage months out there. I'd encourage everyone to learn a little bit more. Something tells me that one of those months celebrates part of your heritage too. With that, Beryl, I think we're going to wrap up and send it back to you to close us out.
Super. Brian and Jina, we appreciate having both of you with us today. And with that, this is the conclusion of today's webinar. We here at CPA Academy will process your credit later today. That, along with a copy of this webinar and handouts, will be available in your CPA Academy accounts within 24 hours. And if you look in your email inbox, you will find the evaluation link for this webinar. We do always appreciate hearing your feedback on our sessions. Thanks again to our wonderful presenters. We are appreciative of your time and insights, and a warm thanks to all of you in the audience for your participation today. Please do check the schedule on our website for additional information, and we hope to see you on a future webinar. Have a great day, everyone.